So this is 1930 GMT on Friday, the 7th of August 2020. Now this column by David Aranovich was actually on the Times, page 23 of the Times on Thursday the 6th of August 2020. And we're starting this edition of the Kudila TV channel test broadcast, recording real content, all copyrights of the comment and contents, original, asserted by myself, Muhammad Haque, editor and presenter of this program, about which we shall be talking a bit more later into the program. Now, this is a comment piece in the Times on the Thursday, 6th of August 2020, by a former Communist Party member, David Aranovich. Aranovich is Aranovich. It's a Russian name, but Aranovich is English born. Now, this piece in the Times may not be accessible to people who might be trying to access it on the internet because Rupert Murdoch, the owner of the Times, has created a paywall, which means that only paid for subscribers are accessing the full articles. So this is for their benefit. I'm doing a detailed account on this piece. Is how long can we go in packing the loads? Now this means how low can we go in packing the loads? What he means by low is that Boris Johnson, the current holder of the post of Prime Minister of Britain, has, as the convention has it, the unwritten British Constitutional Convention, is able to recommend to the monarch, Queen Elizabeth, the appointment of any number of people to the upper house, the unelected upper house, but it is a part of the British Parliament. Until it is scrapped or replaced by an elected house, it is part of the constitutionally constituted British Parliament. Now, Aranovich is focusing on the very thing that I have been focusing on and most observers have been focusing on. The appointment to the House of Lords of people including and typified by Claire Fox. Claire Fox, on the records, is a supporter of conventionally, ordinarily defined terrorism, terrorist attacks, mass murders, and denier of genocide, as happened in the case of Srebrenica, where the Serbians were committing genocide against the Muslims in the early 1990s. We'll come to that a bit more into this piece. Now, Aranovich was a former communist, and he was a communist while he was the secretary of the National Union of Students in the 1970s. But Aranovich has turned away from the communist involvement, has become an employee of Rupert Murdoch. There is nobody, absolutely nobody, owning anything like the Murdoch media empire who has anywhere near the matching credibility or claim to be anti-communist as ruthlessly as Rupert Murdoch is. So David Aranovich is not a stranger to staging a wild turn politically, but the fact is that even he thinks it's too low for Johnson to appoint the likes of Claire Fox to the House of Lords. And this piece in the Times of Thursday, the 6th of August 2020, is devoted to a discussion by Aronovich of the Revolutionary Communist Party to which Claire Fox belonged before she became one of the most ardent right-wing propagandists and deniers of genocide and massacres, an anti-Muslim massacre supporter. Now, the Revolutionary Communist Party had posed as a revolutionary left-wing organization in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when they had a significant appearance in Tower Hamlets, during which time I met one of their most racist criminal leaders. And his name is Keith Thompson. He's a racist criminal posed as an anti-racist, and he was actually obstructing campaigners like myself who are based in Tower Hamlets and defending the community. And he had the audacity to tell me what was the best way forward for defending the community. Now, he threatened to call the police on me. Now, you can call the police only when there is a crime being committed. You don't call the police or threaten to call the police on anybody for expressing an opinion, which is exactly what I was doing at that particular time. So Keith Thompson, the racist liar, went on to write a book about fighting racism. We'll come to that in the subsequent editions. Now, Keith Thompson was one of the racists operating in Tower Hamlets, claiming to be defending the Bangladeshis, especially a woman called Afia Begum. We'll come to that in due course, because this edition is only mainly focusing on the latest behavior surrounding one of the RCP's members, former members. But as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can recall, Claire Fox was not visible in Tower Hamlets when the racist provocateur, auteur provocateur, Keith Thompson, was posing as a left-wing anti-racist revolutionary activist defending, as he called, the Bengalis. And the only person that was there more often than Keith Thompson was Fran, a woman called Fran. Her father was a policeman, and her father's name was Kilbington or Kiblington. Now, Fran Eden has disappeared. With that name, she has disappeared, but she has been operating with a different name and playing, as far as I can tell, a nondescript, low-profile role, whatever she is doing these days. And the appearance of Fran was mainly as more anti-racist than ourselves, more radical in opposing the lies and lying than the victims of the lies and lying that the racists were perpetrating. That was the agenda. And they were imposing themselves as our leaders on the community. Everything about them was typical of the racist auteur provocateurs. And that is what they were doing. And that is what, decades later, they have been exposed as having been as that party, Revolutionary Communist Party. So Aronovich, who knows about communists more than I do, has got his whole comment piece of Thursday, the 6th of August 2020, devoted to dissecting them from his standpoint. So he says of Jeremy Corbyn that Corbyn's history of support for unpleasant causes pale into insignificance compared to the people that Boris Johnson has now put into the House of Lords. And he's talking about the Russian Evgeny Lebedev, who is the son of a former KGB agent. Now, Evgeny is the owner of the London Evening Standard, and Evgeny's peerage is the starting point in Aranovic's column. Mr. Lebedev, the son of a former KGB man who managed to emerge from the ruins of the Soviet Union, owning quite a bit of it, is, of course, a newspaper proprietor. If my father had been a billionaire oligarch, maybe I'd have owned a newspaper too. Perhaps I would also have rebuilt a castle in Umbria and invited Boris Johnson and whoever was his spouse at the time for weekends along with other celebrities and flown them home at my own expense. I'm not sure I would have called my wolf cub Boris, though, my poodle possibly. As it is, the Prime Minister managed to visit the Terranova Palazzo in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and while Foreign Secretary in 2016. And every time he stood for election, Mr. Lebedev's organs supported him. This Gatsby Dino Joe is not, as far as I can tell, a bad man. It's not his fault that his main qualification in life has been his father's wealth, but he no more deserves a place in the British legislature than your Uncle Cedric. He's got one as a reward for being a useful chum, and by the way, his elevation helped to push the number of peers of the realm above the 800 mark at a time when everyone, including the government, was committed to reducing them. But the Lebedev peerage and its contribution to inflating the second chamber in relative minor hypocrisy is a relatively minor hypocrisy compared with ennoblement of Claire Fox. So David Aranovich, who is of Russian descent, is a better informed person about things Russian than I will ever be. And David Aranovich has the second qualification as a, quote, former communist to know about the details of the revolutionary communists than I would do, despite the fact that I had a particular contextual confrontation over about 2 years with the RCP as they foisted themselves upon the community in Tower Hamlets in the 1980s. And as I have discussed, those racists included the racist criminal liar Keith Thompson. Now, Keith Thompson was posing as a lawyer as well. If he did know the law, he was not observing the law, but he was exhibiting it, flaunting it, as many of the so-called legally schooled operatives and operators do. These racists have done serious damage over the decades in undermining the opposition by communities affected by racism to racists: institutional, individual, organizational, historic, contemporary, extremist, mediocre, sleeping, and overt and covert racists. So the British disease of racism is actually a disease of imperialistic racism, and especially as these racists, posing as left-wing revolutionary anti-racists, confront people like myself who come from Asia. They do that in a socialist guise, practicing what Thomas Babington Macaulay prescribed for the imperialists in the 19th century. Now, back to David Aaronovitch and diagnosing his diagnosis of Boris Johnson's latest degeneration of British politics. So he's saying that you may recall that back in December, Mr. Johnson was facing the feeble electoral challenge of Mr. Corbyn. Aaronovitch has absolutely put it correctly and has echoed what I have been calling Corbyn the garden gnome. Feeble electoral challenge was only possible to be offered by the garden gnome that Corbyn was in that post. One of the Prime Minister's most effective lines of attack was the Labour leader's history of support for unpleasant causes. Full stop. In Maidstone, for example, Johnson described Corbyn as a man who all his political life has campaigned to break up that union and who supported for 4 decades the IRA, that is the Irish Republican Army, for those who are not resident in Britain, in their campaign violently to destroy it, unquote. Support for provisionals, that is provisional IRA, even the tacit kind offered by Mr. Corbyn, was a disqualifier for high office. That is David Aaronovitch saying about Johnson. But Mr. Corbyn was a mild-mannered peacenik compared with Claire Fox. Now that's the comparison. And that is the confession by a Murdoch-employed media commentator. Murdoch devoted his 5 years during the time that Corbyn was in post as leader of the Labour Party and the leader of the opposition to demonizing Jeremy Corbyn on the bogus, unsubstantiated ground that Corbyn was a supporter of all the bad things that were actually designed to destroy the United Kingdom and civilization as we never knew it. Now, Corbyn is being called a mild-mannered peacenik. This is the first time they're admitting it, that he is indeed a mild-mannered peacenik, not a revolutionary, and most certainly not as unpleasant as Claire Fox. Now, Aaronovitch continues, a member of a Trotskyist sect, the Revolutionary Communist Party, from the early 1980s until its disbandment in the 1990s. Ms. Fox took the most extreme line on endorsing the IRA's armed struggle. The party and its front organization, the Irish Freedom Movement, IFM, stood in solidarity with Republican terrorism. To give you a flavor of their views, Irish Freedom, the in-house journal of the IFM, declared in an editorial in 1990 that the truth of the matter is that the IRA is a guerrilla army engaged in a national liberation struggle. Like any other liberation movement elsewhere in the world, it has widespread support within its community, unquote, including several of whom the editorial did not say it killed over the years. The same edition ran an explainer on the IRA murder that year of Ian Gow, a conservative MP and former aide to Margaret Thatcher. Gow was the author. Now, Gow was the author of that article in the IFM, suggested a legitimate target because he had played a vital role in formulating British policy in Ireland. Then it advised its readers that we must resist all attempts to whip up a sense of solidarity with Gow, as long as we identify with these British warmongers who will remain under the establishment's thumb, unquote. So Aronovich continues his commentary. It was essential, in other words, to take sides in the Irish War with those who had detonated a bomb under Mr. Gow's car. So he continues in the next paragraph. The RCP formally disbanded, but some of its members reformed around their leader, a lecturer called Frank Furedi, first as Living Marxism magazine, then LM magazine, and finally Spiked Online. Despite backing the Serbian war criminal Slobodan Milosevic, arguing that HIV/AIDS was a moral panic and that climate change was an environmentalist hoax, its leading cadres managed some astonishing successes. Their eloquent contrarism brought them publicly and finally, for those who backed leaving the EU, becoming candidates for the Brexit Party. Last year, Ms. Fox won a seat as an MEP, member of the European Parliament. The problem was that her constituency, Northwest England, included the town of Warrington. In 1993, the liberation warriors of the IRA had exploded a bomb in the town center, killing two young boys, Tim Perry and Jonathan Ball. In the wake of that bombing, the Perry family helped to start a peace movement. The RCP's response to Warrington was to support the attack. We defend the right of the Irish people to take whatever measures are necessary in their struggle for freedom and to decry the peace movement. They even attempted to disrupt a commemoration held that month in Hyde Park. That was 27 years ago. It's not prehistory, David Aronovich is saying. He is saying, my eldest daughter is the same age as Jonathan Ball would have been, but in the years since then, Claire Fox has never regretted, resigned from, or apologized for her stance at the time. Before her election last year as an MEP, she merely said that I don't hold those views anymore because there is no war going on in Ireland anymore. Unquote. Adding, quote, my personal politics and views are well known. Though on the issue they have remained unaired for many years, unquote. They have they? Asks David Aronovich. Orwell would have admired the use of the passive tense there. In the past few days, Tim Perry's father, Colin, has said that Fox's peerage offends me and many others deeply. In response, Claire Fox is now quoted as saying that, contrary to what has been reported elsewhere, I do not support or defend the IRA's killing of two young boys in Warrington in 1993, unquote. So Aranovich continues. Again, note the tense here. I do not, not I did not. And the Prime Minister, Aranovich asks, he who castigated Corbyn over the IRA? Question mark. According to number 10 this week, Miss Fox has addressed her historic comments about the troubles, unquote. That is the number 10 issued statement. Aranovich continues, historic comments? Exclamation mark. Any weasel would be proud of that euphemism. So no apology, not from her and not from Mr. Johnson. No repentance, no explanation into the explanation and into the House of Lords to become part of this country's legislature and collect her up to £323 daily allowance. In the week they buried John Hume. John Hume was the architect widely credited for the peace treaty that ended the, quote, troubles in the Irish Northern Ireland and the Irish Island, the Ireland of Ireland, Island of Ireland, Island of Ireland. In the week they buried John Hume, and we were reminded of the sacrifice and nobility of those who fought non-violently for peace. This sticks in the craw. Now, to those who never visited colloquial English, sticks in the craw means it is indescribably outrageous, unbelievable, cruel, lacking in compassion, decency, all the bad things that you can conjure up. It chokes us, meaning you cannot breathe, it chokes us. Lord Labidem, Baroness Fox, and saps that we are, we put up with it. Saps meaning poodles and stooges and weak people. So this is the whole article. How low can we go in pecking the lords? That's the whole article by David Aranovich of Russian descent and a former communist, talking about the Revolutionary Communist Party being part of the Conservative Party's leader Johnson's newly elevated members of the upper house of the British Parliament. Now, if that is not enough evidence of the institutional, individual corruption, outrage, immorality, then you cannot find any, because this is how this country has become morally, on a moral plane, an equivalent to a banana republic when it comes to its claim at the same time to being still a superpower or big power, because the UK still remains a member of the exclusive Security Council in the United Nations. And in all the treaties that the United Nations founding declarations and aims inspired and led the way for, all the treaties that the UK is still actively signatory to uphold the very rights and the very ideas and the very values and the principles that Boris Johnson has trodden on openly, brazenly. And this comment by David Aranovich is significant also because what he has said here in his column on the Times on the Thursday, 6th of August, that is yesterday, is way more appropriate for the time for a democratic debate than anything the Labour Party has said. The Labour Party, not led by Corbyn, whom Boris Johnson demonized and still demonizes, and the Conservatives demonized, but by the former Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, a widely promoted, praised QC, a barrister with a silk that entitles him to more fees, to charge more fees and more money than the non-silk junior barrister, so-called. This lawyer should have known of the United Nations Charter, the international treaty obligations that the UK still is under, and he has not made any comment. So I compare Keir Starmer with Jeremy Corbyn when Corbyn was mocked and ridiculed by David Cameron for Corbyn's visiting the camp for the refugees and asylum seekers across the channel. Keir Starmer is maintaining similar and less acceptable silence in the face of the outrage against the law, against the legal obligations, international treaty obligations that Boris Johnson is flouting, treading on, and defying and showing contempt for. So, in this context, what is the United Nations actually doing about it? Because the treaty obligations are, of course, covered by most of what the United Nations bureaucratically, organizationally still about. And the other treaties that he is flouting come under the purview and the scope of the review and supervision and oversight by the United Nations and its relevant agencies. So that is the emptiness, as I said before, about the housing, the red tape that the Tories or the Boris Johnson's regime is condemning the very little, very kind of moderate control over degenerating housing profiteers. The scrapping of that is being treated by silence from the Labour Party. So, what is the Labour Party for in Parliament? That is the question that we shall be seeking answers to and applying the evidential updates on as we move. Now, the corruption that is embodied in the administration of the Labour-controlled London Borough of Newham Council, which is fronted by elected Mayor Roxana Fiaz. The corruption is connected with the moral vacuum of the Labour Party that is exploited by the likes of the Conservatives, fronted by the extremely dysfunctional and immoral and amoral, unethical Boris Johnson. So how is this society to function? How are ordinary people to function? And the experience suffered at the hands of Newham Council by the ordinary person in Newham is representative of the vacuum and the lack of support, lack of democratic recourse available to people in this, what they call the mother of democracy country. This is an extension, obviously, based on the boast that the Westminster Houses of Parliament is the mother of parliaments. And Boris Johnson is not only treading on that, he is showing two fingers to anyone who dares to even think of a decent, democratic balance and restraint. As the headline to the piece in the Times, piece by David Aranovich says, how low can we go in packing the House of Lords? There has been no outrage about that. There has been the routine listing, the ritual mention of the Claire Fox and Evgeny Lebedov peerages. But that's it. There will be no change. There will be no regret. There will be no removal of these two. And there will be no reduction of the members of the House of Peers. Because one way or the other, they will need to have bogus parliamentary numerical advantage in order to carry on destroying society, the environment, and the values that they still claim to uphold or support or subscribe to. All of that leaves the opposition MPs, the Labour Party is the numerically the largest, plenty of opportunity to actually exploit this steamroller of destruction of democracy or democratic society that is being run by Boris Johnson fronted conservative assault. It is a far right combination that the Johnson cabinet is made of and the Johnson majority is made of, and his advisors, so called, as embodied, personified by Dominic Cummings. Sure. So every opportunity has to be taken to defend the values. That's the only way to defend the community, the people's rights, and the community's rights. So we look at Newham, continuing to look at Newham, how those rights are being flouted by the Labour-controlled Newham Council, fronted by the Pakistani origin, Pakistani descended woman mayor in Newham, elected mayor, executive mayor, exercising executive powers allegedly derived from or linked to the Local Government Act 2000, which was a continuation of the agenda of deregulating democracy that was fronted by Tony Blair and his regime. Now, it is Blair who inspired or pushed for the destruction of the huge council housing stock in Tower Hamlets by transferring thousands of council housing stock to Poplar Harka and to Tower Hamlets community housing during the period of 2003 to 2007 or thereabouts. And as soon as Tower Hamlets community housing got hold of the properties, its chief executive, who was a direct employee in the housing section in the Tower Hamlets Council, Michael Tyrrell, embarked on the most sadistic attacks on the various guarantees that were available to council housing tenants. And we shall come to updating on the role played by the racist criminal Michael Tyrrell in due course. But that is only one racist criminal. There are gangs of racist criminals operating under the guises of being either Labour Party persons or members or councillors or Labour Party aligned criminals in posts, making decisions affecting people's basic human rights contrary to the treaty obligations under the treaties that the UK remains active signatory to. So that's the full statement of the problem, legally, constitutionally. And we have absolutely no evidence that the Labour Party is about to change into the party that the community, the voters, the electors in the borough deserve and need. Now, this part of the Kudila TV channel broadcast is ending at 10 past 8 GMT and 9 minutes, 10 past 9 UK time on Friday, the 7th of August 2020. We shall be continuing a little while later.